Okay, so first I'm going to start off with a few definitions, then I'm going to lead into the framework of what OG is arguing, and then I'm going to go into my constructive points. So just starting off with a few basic definitions. So a moral enhancement drug is kind of like a moral pill. It's used to enhance moral decision making, and its purpose is basically to make morality quick and easy to access, and it gives you access to moral decision making on like a very quick scale. It's very easy. You take a pill, and that enhances your morality. This house is going to be just society in general, so we're not limiting it. You can talk about domestic, we can talk about internationally, not limiting it to anything. And by ban, we're really talking about regulations and legislation that prohibit the research and production of these types of drugs. So the framework, the real thing to consider for this round is what is going to bring the greatest morality to society in the long run, right? We can all argue that morality is a principle that's in society that we're trying to move towards. So what is it that's going to bring greatest morality to society in the long run? So first I want to start off with an analysis of what is morality and go into how it is an intrinsic quality and best built through natural means. So what is morality, right? It's the ability to make judgment calls, more specifically to differentiate between right and wrong. Moral people are able to make the right decisions because they are able to rely on their own self-judgment, weigh factors, see both sides of what is presented before them, and make the right decision in the eyes of society. Now, we as a house would like to argue that morality is an intrinsic quality. Now, why is it intrinsic, right? So, when you are building your own morality, it's something that comes, when you're faced with a decision, it's something that comes from within. It's a form of self-judgment. It's something that initially is actually given to you by something like your parents or teachers or the people around you. But after that initial of them telling you what morality is, it becomes something that is built into you and something that you can use without them present, right? I really want to highlight the idea that learning is an important part of morality. So you learn to be moral. You're not necessarily born moral or immoral. You grow and you learn as a person what is moral and what is immoral. The key thing about morality is that even without these external factors there, you can still be moral. Without your parents there to teach you what's right and wrong, after your parents are not there, when you're faced with a situation, when your teachers are not there, when your friends are not there, you can still make a moral decision, and this isn't dependent on any third-party person, right? But what do pills give you? Pills give you the short, temporary, false sense of morality, right? So you take a pill, and suddenly you're able to make a moral decision. The key thing to remember is that without that pill, you wouldn't have the same level of morality that you would have without the pill, right? So this is a problem. It's only giving you a false, temporary sense of what morality actually is. Unlike with something like your parents telling you what morality is, once they tell you, it's up to you to decide what you want to do with that information. You're still the main actor making that decision. But when it comes to a pill, it's an aid that's going to influence your decision making, and without it, you would not make the same decisions. The idea of self-growth is important because with morality, we want to see self-growth. We want to see people developing as individuals and being able to make their own choices free of any kind of third party or any kind of aid, right? Why do we want this? Why is it bad to allow extrinsic people to come in and make the decisions for us, right? So it removes the idea of autonomy, right? We as people want to be able to make decisions that are free of other people's influences. Morality is something that should be decided for the self, that should be decided by other people or other aids. It's also fake, because if we look at something if we compare this to something like happiness, right, and pills that enhance happiness, what do we see? We see pills that enhance happiness by the release of dopamine, right? But it's a false sense of happiness. It's not real. It's temporary, and yes, it releases the same neurotransmitter, but it doesn't have the same long-term effects that having intrinsic happiness does. Go ahead, Josiah.
All right. So morality, if we're to buy that it's learned, right, can be easily swayed based off of circumstances outside of your environment, right? If we at least provide a drug that gives long-term sustainable morality, shouldn't that be better than indecisive, sporadic morality?
Okay, well, this pill is not giving you long-term morality, first of all, right? When you take it, it has an effect for a certain amount of time. Maybe it's enhanced in the false way for that short period of time, but the moment the pill goes out, it's gone, right? Also, if you're thinking that morality is easily swayed, I would actually argue against that. I feel people have distinct moral codes that are built into them from a very young age. And the idea of learning doesn't just happen like that. It's something that's built over years. And what the moral decisions people make, they think about and they make over years. These are things that are built into them. And people's morals and principles don't change as easily as we would like them to believe. Yes, they can be swayed, but the fact is that Whether they're swayed or not relies on them, again, intrinsically on them and them as an individual based on the past experiences that they have. So how do we learn what morality is, right? We learn morality through experiences. However, if you're taking something like a pill from an early age, you'll never really learn what morality is because you don't have any experiences, past experiences where you maybe made a moral decision or an immoral decision, and were able to learn from that. You're not able to do that with something like a pill. You're always using this false aid, and because of that, you never have any experiences to teach you what real morality is. Now, going into my second point about dependency, right? The issue with these moral enhancement drugs is that they will build a dependency in the end, just like all other drugs do. Obviously, we know that dependency is really bad for us, right? The basic principle is that the more you take these moral enhancement drugs, the more dependency you're going to build on them, the more you're going to rely on them to be able to make moral decisions. This becomes a slippery slope, because at what point does the pill take over, and where the pill is making the decision for you, not yourself? We want morality to become part of ourselves. We want it to be something that we can access as people without relying on these third-party things. Now, the long-term effect of this is that if we have a society dependent on these drugs, we're going to replace long-term teachings on morality with the use of this pill. For example, instead of educating our kids from a young age, don't steal, don't cheat, don't kill people, don't do things that are bad for society, we're going to just replace long-term things that require such heavy investment like education with something like a pill, which is a quick, easy solution. Pop it in the kid's mouth. They're making the moral decision in the long term. We don't really care what happens in the we don't really care what happens in the long term. As long as they're short-term, we're seeing short-term games, we don't really care. And that's where society is going to go towards, where we're going to replace these long-term sustainable methods for morality with something quick and easy to access like a pill. So what are we showing you here today? We're trying to see what will bring the greatest morality to society in the long run. As we've shown, morality is an intrinsic quality, and so we want people to be able to make decisions by themselves without being forced by this external aid factor. Also, we don't want people to become dependent on these drugs because in the long run, they're going to start using these drugs instead of actually making moral decisions by themselves without any kind of further aid. And because of that, we're proud to.
You have the prison population, you have the psychiatric population. These are all populations of people who were excommunicated from society. We're bringing them and giving them a venue to come back in. And that's a big impact that you can take.
Ribbon Park.
Just make sure this is still recording.
Okay, so before I get into my constructive points, I'd just like to open up with a round of rebuttals. So OG has come up here and told you that morality is a learned experience, right? Like over your lifetime, you're supposed to be able to understand and make judgment calls that you've made in your life, right? So like I feel like the scope they're not really addressing is people in society who haven't really been given the ability to gain a sense of morality, right? And the people who who lived in a foster home and didn't have those chances to really understand like society as a whole and make moral decisions. Or even people within prisons, right? The people who have been in our society have been unable to make moral decisions, have been unable to make unethical decisions. We can give them a chance and stop problems before they happen by giving people the chance to use moral enhancement drugs. So in prisons, I'll give an example to their idea that morality is a learned process and should stay intrinsic to a person, right? People within prisons or people who make immoral decisions like rapists or robbers or anything, by giving them a chance to take moral enhancement drugs, we stop problems before they happen, right? We can allow people to make better decisions that are more ethical to prevent people from making big problems within our society, right? So, okay, let's bite the bullet, right? Let's say moral enhancement drugs are not as good as we think they are, right? Let's say that they don't do the positives that we see them to be. In OG's world, that's what they would like to believe, but in oppositions, we'd like to understand that even if the research and development of a drug that isn't really sustainable is long term, even if that's not at this time, even if that's not good, by banning such processes, we're banning the progression and the development of other research that could stem from moral enhancement. So what do I mean by this? Let's take an example. Let's talk about use of marijuana, right? So in the last 100 years, marijuana has come through like, oh, it's a terrible drug, we shouldn't use it, right? And the research and development of it should be completely banned, right? But in the last decade or so, understanding the uses of marijuana as a whole, be able to understand that like marijuana isn't a drug that just offers such negative uses. It has so many positive uses that we weren't really used to before, like use of in autistic children, right, to prevent to hurt themselves, or in cancer patient use. But if we were to ban that research, we would have never seen the overall positive outcomes. There's so many people that we wouldn't have seen if we had banned it, right? So, like I said earlier, morality is a learned process in OG's world. So they're assuming like everybody in this society can just be able to understand what is moral and what is immoral, right? But the fact of the matter is that really isn't true. Some people, like I talked about earlier, aren't given those chances to really understand what's ethical in our society and what's unethical in our society. Is like robbing a store or like raping people, is that an okay thing or is that a bad thing? By the use of moral enhancement drugs, we're preventing that problem before it happens, because we're giving a basis of in our society what's really ethical, what isn't ethical, and we're preventing those problems before they happen. Thank you.
Okay, so one thing that their characterization of the situation lacks is this idea of which ideal morality will be implemented in this morality pill. Because if we say that this rapist doesn't learn any morality and we give it a utilitarian pill, then 5 rapists pleasuring from raping someone will still continue to rape, because utilitarian perspective of morality will allow them to. So how would you respond to that?
Okay, I think there's a really basic understanding of what's really moral and what's immoral. I'm not talking about so many different nuances to what's immoral and moral. I'm talking about the really fact of the matter. It's like if someone's going to make a bad decision or when someone's going to make a right decision. I think we can all agree by robbing a bank or raping someone, that's a bad, unethical, and immoral decision. But by providing moral enhancement drugs, we can stop that big problem before it happens. Those small nuances are such a small amount of people, right? We're talking about the big problems, these people who are unable to make these ethical decisions that OG just believes everybody will be able to understand, right? The reality is that nobody will really understand what's really ethical or unethical in this world, and they should have an understanding of that with the use of moral enhancement drugs. Thank you.
You're assuming that people like rapists and murderers, they really want to be moral, but they're just not able to, so this magic pill will somehow now enable them to be moral. But how do you respond to the fact that they perhaps just don't even want to take this drug? And that if we want to even have long-term morality, we imbue it in them through education and things like that.
So I understand this. I just want to say, like, people within these prisons or people who make these bad decisions isn't just because they learn to be bad people, right? It's a part of their mental state. Some people are unable to make these right decisions because they're just genetically unable to make the right decisions that they're supposed to be making, right? We've seen that a lot of times in a lot of research, right? By providing moral enhancement drugs, we're stopping that, because in OG's world, they're saying like moral people learn to be moral because the world just teaches them that. But the fact is that the world doesn't teach people to be moral all the time, right? Because first, people don't have the opportunity to learn what's moral and immoral, and some people are just genetically predisposed to make the wrong decisions, right? Moral enhancement drugs stop both of those problems before they happen. So I'd just like to get into my constructive points that I already kind of like solidified within my rebuttal. So the first thing I want to say is that moral enhancement drugs. What is this roundabout? Why is the research of moral enhancement drugs a positive, right? Why is it better than OG's world where we completely ban those policies, right? Drug research is always necessary. Like I talked about with the marijuana example, even if the short-term benefits even if the long-term benefits aren't weighed out within the short-term benefits, if we're just researching, we don't know what's going to stem out from our research, right? The research of moral enhancement drugs could lead to research of other drugs that are even more positive, right? Like I said earlier, if we bite the bullet and say moral enhancement drugs aren't that good and we don't see the positive we need them to be, the research itself is important. We have to understand that. We research within a society by putting these bans on certain things. We're like not able to develop as a whole because like we don't know what's going to stem from a lot of things. Like I talked about with marijuana, and even with like examples like drugs used to for patients who like display depression, right? Like 100 years ago, people really didn't care about depression as a whole. It wasn't really recognized as like an issue, but we understood like depression is like a genetic and like it's a part of who they are, right? It isn't just because of how they're feeling. It's like an actual genetic part of like it's genetic, right? So into my second point, like I said earlier, by banning this research, we're hindering the progression of research as a whole, right? Like possible research that could stem from moral enhancement drugs. By banning it as a whole, like we're saying, okay, we're completely cutting off those like the branching effect of what the research could provide, right? And just in terms of what OG had come up here and said, that somehow the short-term benefits aren't that good, right? So let's say our drug doesn't last that long, or like the patient becomes dependent, right? Why is dependency such a problem in OG's world? Dependency of a lot of people on drugs, like dependency as a whole, like we could prescribe these drugs in correct amounts. It doesn't mean that everybody's just going to get 100 pills that can take it 100 times a day. We could prescribe these pills in correct dosages for those people to take them in correct amounts, so then if dependency is not that much of a problem, right? And also, OG had come up here and said, like, oh, what if moral enhancement drugs only provide short-term benefits? But we have to understand that, like, we don't understand the long-term benefits until we, like, actually research and understand this this field, right? So, like I said earlier, like, this research can be, this research is good and hindering research is a bad thing. Thank you. I'd like to proud to welcome
I'd like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister.
These were points you said. Promotes future research, predicting support for prison psychiatry, and hinders societal progression.
So the reason we're in this debate right now is to basically evaluate the effectiveness of a moral enhancement drug and what the goals of this pill would be, right? So what we get out of the case right now, first I'm going to begin with a rebuttal against that case, and I'm going to show you exactly why that really doesn't solve any great problems. Well, one main argument that we get is this idea that the people that didn't get a chance to have right experiences will get to learn morality basically through this pill, right? So number one rebuttal to this would be like, who is deciding what the right moral thing to do is? Because clearly this pill, like I will develop in my constructive, there will be conflicting ideas of morality in that pill in itself. What does that mean? Like I asked in my POI, right? For example, like I asked in the POI, if the pill is operating on this utilitarian idea of morality, right, what happens then? Then what happens is like someone who has participated in some sort of group activity where a group is getting a pleasure at the expense of one person's harm will continue to do so even with the pill. Now what else happens, right? They're assuming, another rebuttal on this is that they're assuming that the right decision to make is a simple thing, right? But we say that it isn't simple because when you learn morality naturally, you're able to actually rationalize what the right decision is. Taking a pill simplifies that to a very unique decision, a very specific decision, which isn't the correct thing to do when you're judging a situation because a lot of theories will conflict and a lot of ideas of morality do conflict. The second idea that they try to throw is that research will be halted. Well, we say, number one, this is a very unwarranted claim because clearly research will not be halted on all these other drugs because they all address different aspects of society. We're just saying that over here, to enhance morality through a drug is not efficient. And the second thing is, even if we take their best case where there are restrictions, we say that will incentivize society to actually create programs and create other sorts of methods that will actually allow some sort of natural change in morality in these individuals. Now I'm going to develop 3 new constructive points. Number one, the idea of conflicting morality, which I've already got into a little bit, right? There's a difficulty in determining the moral framework on a pill itself. Naturally, we're able to conceive of different ideas of morality. What do I mean, right? For example, let's say that there is a doctor in a situation, right? And we're going to take their world where they need to take this moral pill. Now, let's say the situation is that they have to triage, they have to allocate resources properly. If they take this sort of a Kantian pill, what happens then is that they have to regard everyone as equal value, and that is not the most effective way of dealing with morality in that specific case. What I'm trying to say is that one pill cannot actually help you develop into all the different cases that are there, right? At the same time, in that case, if they take the utilitarian pill, then of course they'll be able to actually allocate resources properly. Now another argument could be this idea of whether you should be taking this moral pill to influence your decisions at all, because there are many other factors in life that influence decision. What do I mean? Let's say you're in a car with your family, right, and your brakes stop working. Now you can turn right, but there are people on the right, and then those people will be hurt, but they'll most likely some of them will die. But if you turn left, your car will crash, and what then happens is that people in your car, your family is hurt. Now, if I take a morality pill and do a cost-benefit analysis, most likely that pill will influence you to turn towards the side where your own family is hurt. But that isn't rationally what a person wants to make, the decision a person wants to make, right? So what are we basically getting at, right? The first case is that one case that they might try to rebut and they might try to argue is that you can make many different pills. What then happens is that you need to learn to take the right pill. Remember, the purpose of this drug is to enhance the moral decision-making of an individual. If you are learning to take the right pills, you're already going through that process of learning what morality is. So there's no reason to even actually make this pill in the first place. It's just like a middle ground for no reason. And the second case is that when there are many pills, then you will have to choose one pill. And then that, of course, creates a conflict because the national idea of morality will allow you to actually consider everything. Dave, you had a question.
So in OG's world, they believe that morality is a learned process, right? As opening oppositions have told you, what if a person is mentally or genetically incapable of making those decisions, right? How do we address those people?
Okay, so now this is actually going to get into my second sort of argument, why it is bad to commodify morality for a society. It's bad because now what happens is that these people that they're trying to make a case for, they're already on this ground where they're not getting full-on access to all sorts of like treatments already, right? So what does this mean? If you commodify this morality pill and we take this case of like this pill does exist, then this becomes a business where the better moral pills, let's say if they try to argue that the morality pill can encompass all sort of morality, right? Those pills will be more costly than the pills that are more simplified and like more specific. So what that happens is that this sort of divide is fostered. This is the second argument. The commodification, that's bad for the long run because if you're fostering a divide on who gets the pill based on income or based on access, then that's bad in their world. And these people that they're trying to argue for will clearly be on the worst offside on that side of the argument. And now the last argument that I'm going to advance is more on an international scale, right? What does this mean? In an international scale, countries will try to implement their specific idea of morality in people. What this basically means is that internationally, these countries will be stuck in the status quo, and the status quo is not always the greatest thing. So let's give an example, right? Let's say a year or two ago, let's say Saudi Arabia had access to these morality pills. Their idea of morality would be like to restrict all the rights that women have. Basically, they're going to foster this restriction through this morality pill. And if society gets access to this morality pill and then they take it, there will be no change in society. You need to look outside the world in order to see what the correct idea of morality is. And we say on our side of the house, since every specific situation, every specific case in every specific country has a bunch of different moral decisions that are coming into play, you need to be an individual that is able to rationalize everything. And as my partner has already brought up, the idea of like basically building a dependency on a pill and then, of course, needing the pill more and more as you build a higher tolerance for the pill, that's wrong because these people then will not be able to actually have any sort of change, especially on an international scale, because they will have to, one, just take that pill that the government or the society is trying to implement in them. And we say that is like the biggest harm that they have to sort of fight against. That's why I'm incredibly proud to propose.
I'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
All right. Adjudicator, there are three big issues with this round today, right? First off, we get a completely failed PM speech that leaves gaping holes in the model, then provides a DPM who provides model critique 21 minutes into the round to try to, solidify and recrystallize the case and start skewing this debate completely off of what Dave told you this debate should really be focusing around, right? What did we hear from the debate today? We hear that morality, first off, is this idea to make better judgment decisions, right? Then we hear the DPM come up and tell you that there are now skewed hierarchies of what exactly morality is in a nuanced principle level within nuanced principle parts of society, right? We're telling you that this is such an unfair treatment of opening opposition, considering we're playing ball with the main model that was provided by Sonali, right? This idea that morality will be one blanket statement idea that you can make better decisions for or make better judgment calls, right? Or the ability to make these judgment calls. So insofar as we play with that ball and not this unfair model critique that came in halfway through the debate, we tell you that we're going to stick with what Sonali said in their model in the first 7 minutes of her speech and play ball with that in the sense that it provides a more equitable round where everyone can actually have some clash and not be broken down by caveats of like income inequality suddenly all of a sudden because of the same pill, right? So we tell you, what else should you understand, Lauren, today? In the status quo, there still exists the FDA, right? There still exists the Department of Health. There still exists advocacies and oversight committees and oversight groups that still consist to make sure this drug is not going to be something that's harmful for community members, right? And then what's the second issue with OG's model, right? Dave came up and told you that this drug is not being given out like freaking churros on the side of the road, right? Like this is something that's prescribed legally by licensed professionals, right, in the healthcare field. Who are these prescriptions going to be given to, right? Members of society that OG has completely forgot to bring up, right? Members of society that are being marginalized and uniquely discriminated against, like prison populations, like psychiatric populations, right? People who can't reinstate themselves into society because, first off, they made an immoral decision, and now that immoral decision is being led to a diagnosis that it's because of chemical imbalances in the mind, right? Insofar as this drug has been approved by the FDA, approved by the Department of Health, has been sanctioned by the state or whatever regional direction they have to make sure that this is something that's sustainable for human life to have on a long-term basis, we believe that the dependency argument falls apart, right? Insofar as people take diabetes drugs every day or something, that's a dependency on a drug, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be a net harm, right? We're just telling you why exactly is dependency bad. Insofar as we believe the FDA approved it, the Department of Health approved it, they probably did research into what are the long-term effects of this drug before it got approved for the mass population. So that argument completely falls. Then they come up here and tell you that it's like the morality should be learned, right? This morality is experience-based. Again, we say, okay, fine, we bite the bullet on that, maybe 65% of society is able to learn through good parenting, good school systems, maybe good, nuclear family relatives who are able to, treat them and tell them what's right. But then what about the other percentage of society, right? The percentage of society that go to foster homes, the percentage of society that are homeless, right? The percentage of society who don't have money to go to school, right? Where do they then learn this morality from? The streets, right? Insofar as they're not providing that the alternative for this moral enhancing drug, even when it's safe to be given to the mass population, is not something that's going to be inherently bad for people who don't have this experience of learning, then we're telling you it's a win on our side of the house, right? Insofar as this drug is able to provide no net real harms to the physical nature of the body, but instead is able to provide some way to enhance the inherent moral principle that can be made through a human being, then we feel like this enhancement drug should be something that should be given to people through prescription, through legal means, to people who actually need that ability to now make moral decisions in society. With that in mind, we move into what Dave told you, right? Dave told you that it prevents future research when you ban research and development, right? We still haven't gotten a really good argumentation back from this, right? He's saying that no, other sectors of research still exist. We agree, other sectors of research still exist, but not the cognitive internal development side, which we're focusing on with this drug, right? That's the idea of saying because we don't research in marijuana, there's still chemotherapy drugs that are out there, so that's enough for, researching into what we can do to help stop the pain of cancer, right? It's not really, I don't buy this idea that you're not really hindering a specific sector of research when you completely make legislation that makes it illegal to kind of, take part in this research as a whole. So we feel again, the points that new fields stemming from this research are lost. Current research that's going to be done in this is going to be lost. Money that's already been dumped into these sectors is now going to be lost. These are all three big net harms that are still not being addressed by OG's side of the house. With that in mind, the second point coming out of Dave was that it preemptively supports marginalized members of society, like prison workers and psychiatric patients who, again, are not going to be able to have a clear pathway to enter back into society and be trusted to be clear members that are to be trusted in society, right? Insofar as this moral enhancement drug can somehow provide a pathway or a venue or some type of facilitation for these people to now become members of society, you'll get to gain the access of my next point, right? My new off-piece point, that societal productivity as a whole increases, right? When you have thousands and thousands of prison population members who are now able to make judgment calls that are morally on the standard or normalized with what society believes in that region, we tell you that this is good for society, right? Because now these are workers who can now go back into the labor force. These are workers who can now go back and make families. These are now children who can attend schools. These are now schools that you can give education that can provide you better graduate studies, right? These are now students who can get graduate studies and now become doctors or lawyers. Now this is like long-term tiered benefits that we give you on our side of the house for an impact. With that in mind, we tell you that opening opposition wins on that argument. Raz, I'll take the question.
How does implementing this pill help people that either refuse to take this pill or do not want to take this pill get back to
That's
society?
great, right? So we believe in a society that has a freedom of choice, which is, again, something that's missed by opening government completely, right? This idea that they believe that it can just be blanket morality for everyone, right? If there is so far as a choice, we believe that those who can have that choice should take the choice, right? There are people who have made immoral decisions, who are locked up in psychiatric wards in some sense, and want to make a difference in the world, want to change, but they know that they physically can't because of their brain imbalance, chemical imbalance or something, or because of what they've been diagnosed. We feel like they should have every right to take the drug or not take the drug, right? Those societal members who decide not to take the drug will still stay in the institution that are providing the care and the treatment that they need to be in that environment rather than out in the world causing mayhem. So with that in mind, we still believe that's not a negative. Thirdly, we told you that it hinders societal progression, right? We live in a world where it's principled on societal progression through research and development, right? We believe that these are very big, important ideologies that we should continue to follow in this world. And if we don't be able to follow that, it's more net harms in the world coming in the future rather than net benefits. With that in mind, what do we tell you, right? What has opening opposition told you? We feel like this idea that there's a conflicting morality or that there's a hierarchy of Kantian morality versus utilitarian morality just came out of nowhere, right? It's this idea that we believe that insofar as Sonali's model didn't show that in the first 7 minutes of her speech like it was supposed to, we'll buy this argument that it's supposed to be about clear whether or not you're able to make a judgment call. And on that case, we still believe that our points stand in this round. We're incredibly proud to oppose.
I would like to welcome a member of Parliament to their experiment.
This is the app. Yeah. Makes sense. This is good. Yeah, it goes by speech. So now it's government laws.
Okay, so first I'd like to open up the second half of this debate by first going into a few rebuttals and then going into my main extension. So first I'd like to talk about what the opening opposition team came up here and said. So they came up here and they talked about this idea how that even though the implementation of this pill might be a short-term fix right now, by implementing research down the line, this can be a long-term fix. However, this is a bunch of assumptions that they're making on their side of the house because they believe that even if we do make certain changes to this pill and we do some sort of research, we're going to come up with this magnificent cure to everything that's going to fix all our problems. Okay, let's play ball with that idea. Let's say that this does help in some way, shape, or form in the long term. Now, that still collides with the fact that we came up here and we're talking about this idea of autonomy. It still takes away this idea of autonomy that we want to build through natural learning. And they want to take away that idea of autonomy by having this long-term pill implemented rather than having a real form of reform, which is my real extension that I'll be going into. So another important thing that they come up with is they come up here and they tell you that this helps people who are marginalized by society. So they talk about people who are underrepresented, people that are in prisons, and they say that people in prisons can take this pill and it helps them get back into society. And I asked you, how? So I asked them in my POI, what about the people that don't want to take this pill? Not because they don't want to be a part of society. Obviously, people want to get back into the system and make money. Who here doesn't want to make money, right? Obviously, they want to get back. But what if they have other underlying factors, such as, their religion doesn't support something like this, or there's something that they just clearly do not believe in, and it's something that they are not comfortable trying. What happens to this? So the opposition has told you that they have a place where they can stay in these institutions and they'll get cared for. Now, that is the biggest misconception that we've heard in this debate because of the fact that our American prisons and prisons around the world are one of the worst institutions ever, and they need reform. And that goes into my main extension. So, not at this time. My extension here is that if we implement this pill, it will draw attention away from the real reform that we made. And I'll build off the idea that the opposition made up that came up here and completely butchered. So they said that if we implement this pill, we'll improve our prison system, we'll change it, we'll have pills to help you. But what does this really do? It takes away the idea from the problems that we really face in prisons, such as the lack of education that we implement in prisons, the lack of physical help, mental help, support that we have in prisons. They think that by just implementing a pill that not everyone takes, we're gonna be able to fix these institutions without targeting the real problems. Now, what does this do? If we implement this pill, we create like this. We create this idea that we're targeting the real problems when essentially we're driving away from it. What we're doing is we're placing money and resources into this one idea that may or may not work, rather than focusing on other things that we can improve on. So what they're essentially saying is, let's put money into this one thing and keep pouring money into it if it doesn't work. So, for example, if this place, let's see, like the idea of prisons. So if the prison system isn't working, let's put money into the pills. People are still committing crimes. Money into the pills, money into the pills, money into the pills. Instead of fixing what the prison system is really about and what the fundamental problems they have right now. But you seem to disagree.
So insofar as we're providing some type of mechanism to get out of these prison systems that we agree are shit, you're inherently supporting the status quo, which is just to leave them in prison, right? Like, the scope of the argument is still the same. These people need help. We're at least giving them a way to escape and get that help.
Right, so they come up here and they talk about marginalized groups and helping these marginalized groups in an institution like this. Rather, they're creating a new form of marginalized groups because there are people in those prison systems that want the pill and people that don't, and they're still left there. And our side of the house, what we're essentially doing is we're targeting these areas that need fixing and replacing these direct attention on these areas in institutions that we can provide reform for. Such as I've just mentioned, if the opposition has failed to hear it for whatever reason may be, that we can implement more medical practices that help people in prison that have that need physical help, or better communication lines between guards and prisons. But this is just one example of the reform that we need to do. Essentially what this does is if we take away this pill and we stop the research that essentially does, we get to focus and target more of the harmful effects that we have in our society and focus on institutions that really need it, not at this time. So essentially what we're doing is we're, on our side of the house, what we're really focusing on is this idea of autonomy, leaving people the ability to choose what they want to do, whether it be take the pill or not take the pill, but also improving the status quo that they're in right now. Because not only does continued funding for this pill drive away attention, it puts the money and the funding we could potentially have for other forms of research into this one pigeonholed idea in which the opposition believes will improve the entire world as a whole, rather than focusing on the real problems that we seem to have. Now, not at this time. What does do is it creates this like new standard. So this new standard of driving attention and focusing on and using so what it does is essentially it uses the pill as a scapegoat. So the pill becomes a scapegoat in a society in which everyone will use this pill to fix every problem that we have. So, for example, if we have somebody that's currently in an institution like in healthcare, so like if something in healthcare needs reform, like for example, one of the biggest issues that we face in healthcare right now is that there aren't enough physicians or practitioners in underrepresented neighborhoods. So how can we fix this fix this problem? Well, the opposition will try to bring you into this idea of a world that they picture in which this pill will be implemented in these lower neighborhoods, and this will cause people to make the right decisions if they so choose to take it. However, on our side of the house, with these reforms, what we're essentially doing is putting funds that would stay away from the scapegoat idea of a universal pill, not this time, and essentially put it into other forms of helping the neighborhood and helping people as a whole, and pretty much driving out this imbalance that we have in our society by placing reforms directly into communities that desperately need them. So what we're doing is we're painting a bigger picture and focusing on our societies as a whole and targeting specific reforms. But while the other side of the house, the opposition, is essentially doing is pigeonholing all of our funds, all of our deals into one scapegoat theory that essentially doesn't work, because they themselves have said that if people don't want to take this pill, they don't have to. So now that idea leads into the idea of separating people even further. What we're essentially doing is trying to create an equal playing field that pretty much allows people, that grants people the idea of autonomy, the idea of choice, while also coupling that with this idea of reform and truly targeting the problems that we're facing in our society. As a result of that, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
We don't want to look. I'm just saying. Rod's getting a little fired.
Oh, that was nice.
All right.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty good.
I need a partner to bounce ideas off.
Yeah, no, I like no one to talk to, so I didn't ask any like.
Yeah, I'll see myself on YouTube, bro.
Where am I?
Okay. So speaking on behalf of opposition, I'd like to state one thing, that like Deputy Leader of Opposition said, I will be playing ball with OG's original model that was given to us by the Prime Minister. So allow me to go into a few rebuttals of just what came out of opening and closing half of government. So let's just say that we're playing with the idea that morality is learned and that the pills give you a short, temporary sense of morality. But first, let me rebut that by saying, what about extended-release psychiatric and neurological medications? What about depressed and suicidal individuals who use SSRIs to make the moral decision to stay on track in their lives? And before you get up and ask me a POI about SSRIs, let me say that with your model, SSRIs and antidepressants are actually moral enhancement drugs based on your model, because you say that moral enhancement is just the ability to make a better moral decision. So you're saying that people who are depressed and suicidal and people who have problems who need to take SSRIs, their minds are simply blurred and they can't make the moral decisions that they need without these pills. So I'm also saying, as part of my extension, that SSRIs and antidepressants do fit into your model as moral enhancement drugs. But moving on, not this time. OG also fails to speak of the neurological effects of drugs on the brain's wiring and how the brain works. Eventually, with the extended use of medications, biochemical changes occur in the brain that makes the brain naturally wired to replicate these effects. And one quote from OG that I kind of laughed at was, "Pop a pill into a kid's mouth." Well, no, because neurological drugs, as your side has defended the ideas of these drugs being bad and being a part of a non-recommended society in which kids are just popping pills to make moral decisions. You're not supposed to give kids neurological drugs before the age of 12 or 13 or until puberty hits, because the brain has not acquired the resources or the ability to break down or use these drugs to its full potential. But I'll take opening hand.
Okay. Well, one thing regarding this whole kind of pigeonhole thing that they're trying to put on our model. Well, basically we're saying that morality is the ability to make a good decision, right? But then we're also saying that in a moral pill, there are going to be conflicting sort of ideas that are going to drive it. And that's why it's not effective to research into a moral pill in the long term. And that's why
time. Okay, but DLO already stated that we have things like the FDA and regulations and people who can regulate and people in society who can actually prescribe and regulate these medications and make sure they're going to the right people, like psychiatrists and therapists and things like this, and pharmaceutical companies that can regulate all of this. And I think your POI just kind of falls apart because of what DLO said. So what is the problem with society creating programs for the moral enhancement pills is my question to DPM. What is the problem with making these institutions that will actually economically benefit society and putting more money into research and development, which is a long-term investment in the economy, making society better as a whole, since the house is society, as previously stated. And DPM also brings up the train track paradox. This is a complete blurring of OG's points, because this test of morality is used for people who are actually psychiatrically ill. So it works better on opposition side than governments, because government fails to address psychiatrically ill patients. Also, government makes the assumption that killing your family would be more moral in this scenario, but speaks not of the psychiatric patients who would say otherwise. Insofar as government fails to speak of psychiatric patients and how their morals will be affected in their world, opposition takes this debate. Moving on to member of government. Now, this time, no more POIs. Even member of government fails to come up to the podium, garbage can, and show how extended-release neurological medications exist to create a long-term benefit. His extension says that pills draw away from actual reform. Let me break down member of government's extension by showing how opposition actually does push towards reform. So our investment in the pills actually brings light to psychiatric and neurological problems and brings light to the prison population. This in itself is opposition's main reform. So I believe that we have our side of reform covered and that your extension falls apart. No more POIs. Opposition never stated that everyone would utilize the pills. We have specific individuals who are specialized in giving away the pills. They're not sold like churros on the side of the street. And if member of government says that we have a lack of psychiatrists, wouldn't it help to bring people back into the job market using opposition's ideas that the pills will help people get a better education? So this point falls as well. No more POIs. Let me go into my extension. So my extension kind of revolves around the points that I've already talked about. So that antidepressants and SSRIs are drugs that are moral enhancement drugs, like OG's model already states. And let me go into an actual anecdote. My own sister met a man in her internship here while studying to become a doctor. This man had bipolar disorder and homicidal tendency. He, in a fit of bipolar rage, went to his parents' house, threw gasoline on his father, burned the man alive, threw his mother out the window, beat her to death, put both the bodies in the back of his truck, and left them in the middle of the desert. A patient history was then taken, and no history of problems were found other than bipolar and depressive disorder. So, with antidepressants, which is a moral enhancement drug due to OG's definition, or any other type of moral enhancement drug, could have been used. Let's see the best case scenario. Gov's world would simply try to teach people like this to be moral, but likely would not get very far. In our world, we have an attempt, a sole attempt, to solve the physiological and neurological imbalance that hindered this man's moral compass. So in Gov's best case, we have a docile conversation about why you shouldn't kill your parents, but probably still dead parents. Opposition's best case has a medicated, simple solution, dodging a huge bullet in this case. In OG's model, Adderall is also a morality enhancement drug because it focuses the mind and allows you to make better decisions by not blurring your focus. So would you really want to strip people with ADD or ADHD of the only drug that will make them function at an even average level? Or would we concede and make it so that these people are forced to lag behind the people in society who are neurologically capable of processing and absorbing knowledge? Would we strip these people of their education on OG's side? DLO also brings up the point that people coming back into society is a positive this side of the bench, and this only bolsters my first piece of evidence about economics, the idea that research and production of drugs has been shown to increase economic stability with a given nation if government funded. The investment into research and development is a long-term investment which will eventually make education and general society better. So, closing opposition shows you the impacts of OG's and OO's points. So closing op takes this round by the bit of impact. And with that, I am proud to oppose.